Hello, eavesdroppers. Welcome to the Mix and Mash podcast. My name's McConaughey, and I am here alongside Beccah Grace, and you're watching this either on the NJ Today YouTube channel or on mishmashers.com. On Mix and Match, we aim to talk about a wide variety of topics, and for today's video, we're sitting down to share our thoughts on the first season of the horror psychological thriller TV show, Hannibal. So what are your initial thoughts? Because for me, I had already seen this show 2 times around. The thing is, I have recommended this to so many people. I have told people about it. I've streamed it from the heavens that Hannibal is great. And so I can tell you from the get-go my initial thoughts, but what were your thoughts?
My thoughts were I was excited because I knew how much you loved it and I wanted to experience something you enjoyed. And I also kind of knew a little bit about the character, but not very much. Just the basics. He's a murderer and he eats people.
Had you seen The Silence of the Lambs, or had you seen, or even read the books?
I have not.
Well, for me, I had read the books. I have read Red Dragon, and I have read Silence of the Lambs both. They weren't bad, but I didn't care for them very much. And then I went ahead and, of course, the Silence of the Lambs movie is a classic, and everybody talks about Anthony Hopkins and his performance as Hannibal Lecter. And those movies are alright. Like, I don't mind them at all. I enjoy them, and I enjoy the character. But whenever you watch Silence of the Lambs, I personally think that he comes off in a very cartoonic way. Like, in a very cartoony kind of way. Like, hello, Clarice, and does all these elaborate little things. And it comes off very unhinged and creepy, but it doesn't feel like a character. It doesn't feel like the kind of monster you'd come across in day-to-day life. Like, if you talk to... And it's a lot of it's because he's already been captured and he has no reason to put on the facade. But at the same time, if you ever met someone like him in person, you'd go, crazy, stay away from him. Whereas this character, how it's presented in this one, it comes off in a lot more of a nuanced way. But so my impressions leading into it is I didn't really think much at all about it. I didn't really have any reason to care about Hannibal Lecter or Hannibal in general. Like, I liked it, but I didn't love it. So those were my thoughts leading into it. And yeah, wasn't really that excited about it when I first watched it. It was just kind of a, hey, I hear that show's kind of okay, so I'll watch it. As already suggested, Hannibal is a horror psychological thriller by Brian Fuller for NBC and is based on characters and elements appearing in Thomas Harris's novels Red Dragon and Hannibal, respectively, with the series predominantly centering around the relationship between Will Graham and Dr. Hannibal Lecter. Will Graham's character can best be described as an emotionally receptive individual, deemed as being on the autism spectrum. Brought into the FBI as a special investigator because of his abilities to empathize with serial killers and recreate their approach, Dr. Hannibal is a forensic psychiatrist that just so happens to moonlight as a serial killer and finds himself intrigued by Will Graham and his special abilities. In the first season, Will Graham works with the FBI in an effort to find and thwart the efforts of serial killers, all while Hannibal sets in motion a diabolical and methodical plot that works to attack Will Graham's perception of reality.
I admit, when I first started, I was a little uneasy, and I was like, okay, this is a little weird, but it's pretty interesting. By episode 2, I'm like, it's definitely weird, but it's very interesting. I think by episode 3, I was completely hooked. I was like, put it in again. So I was astounded by the elegance of Hannibal. He's a man who plays life like a well-tuned cello. Every tiny movement is thought out and done with such care. The only time he seems to show any sort of aggressive personality and uncouth behavior is when he is actually slashing people open. It's almost like his entire facade falls away and his elegance gets set to the side, and he just absolutely embarrasses the poor corpse and has fun. But then he picks up that mantle again and he makes beautiful artwork in the kitchen Now, the fact that they're made with humans, tiny detail.
And what I think is interesting, and it brings me back to what I said about the movies, how Hopkins portrayed Hannibal Lecter. It's his way was very, very unhinged, like a very, very go out there and play a crazy person, and that's what he did. Whereas I think that in this one, and the actor that plays this guy is his name's Mads Mikkelsen. He's otherwise known, you've perhaps seen him in the movie Rogue One or in Doctor Strange more recently. He's kind of gotten a lot more popular ever since Hannibal was canceled. Like I said, something about him, it's just a lot more nuanced of a performance. Like it seems like someone you could meet in real life and just have a creepy vibe. Like even before it's introduced or told to the audience, of course you know because it's Hannibal Lecter, but there's something off about him. Like it's something a little too perfect about him. And I think what you said at one point was he goes a little extra. He's very, very, he's very, very neat. He's very, very calculating. Everything, it feels like a chess match with him, which is a very, very unique thing to see. You said that you think he kind of comes unhinged whenever it comes to killing. Honestly, and I think what you're referring to a lot of the times is probably like those scenes where he's trying to emulate other serial killers. Whenever he like stabs into a bunch of people and one of the victims and all this, like he still seems very, very specific. You see him in some points whenever he's killing people. He wears like a plastic, and the immediate thought is, of course, he's trying to get rid of evidence. He's trying to keep any DNA off of him. But really, my impression of it is that he just doesn't want to stain his clothing. And there's one scene where he is talking to a guy named Tobias at like the dinner table, and they are definitely enemies. And of course, at one point, he threatens Tobias, or he makes a comment. And Tobias is worried because he thinks that he just ate something that's going to spell out the death of him. And Hannibal Lecter says something along the lines of, I wouldn't do that, Tobias. I wouldn't poison the food. Because he's so particular. He holds himself to a higher standard of living. And it's so perfect. And I think that one of the reasons why it works as well as it does is because not only is it just portrayed really, really well, but he is complemented perfectly by Will Graham, like the performance of that character. Honestly, as I think about it, sometimes I go back and forth between which one is my favorite character. Sometimes I'm thinking Will Graham's my favorite character because as I talked about, Will Graham has this thing where he feels pure empathy, which for a long time I always related to his character because whenever I had first started watching it, I was very, very quiet. I was very, very closed off and isolated. So, like, seeing him with all his dogs and just kind of like cut off from society and his ability to feel pure empathy, I find that he really represents the exact opposite of Hannibal Lecter. And I think that the way they tell this story and the way it comes across is whereas it seems like Hannibal Lecter has it all figured out, and Hannibal Lecter is the upper tier quality, it seems like Will Graham has nothing figured out and is just completely confused on how to live life. And he's fragile. He's got good overtone, but he is easily manipulated. He is susceptible to the things around him.
And I remember whenever I was watching, I had two very different feelings for the two of them. On one hand, I was like, go Hannibal, that's my murderous little baby. You got that. Oh, got that bitch. And at the same time, then there was Will, and I just kind of wanted to crawl on the screen and give him a hug
Right?
because it was.
Yeah, sometimes I felt sad for him, like really sad.
He needs a hug.
One of my favorite moments of this season were with Will. Honestly, yeah, I would say Will is probably my favorite character of at least the first season. I don't know necessarily how I'll change when we talk about the second season, but right now I'm like, yeah, he is definitely my favorite character of this first season. At some points when he's sitting there in the chair and he's talking to Hannibal, he's like, I feel crazy. Whenever he brings the alleged person Gideon, who is accused of being the Chesapeake Ripper, over to Hannibal, and he's like, am I seeing this person? And Hannibal tells him he's not. Like, he's like, don't lie to me, don't lie to me. And it's sad. It's like, I said it to you at one point, it feels as though, although Hannibal does some dastardly things throughout this entire series, it feels like the worst thing he ever did was to Will Graham. because he just tortures the guy. Like, he has him convinced that he has mental disorder. At one point, Will Graham's like, "Are these blackouts, are these causing this?" And Hannibal says, like, "It could be dementia." And, like, it's like he doesn't, and because it's Hannibal, he doesn't have a filter, he doesn't try to sugarcoat anything. And he's, of course, feeding him garbage. But he's like, "It could be dementia, you're probably just, like, completely crazy. You're gonna go nuts and all this stuff. You're gonna kill people." And
What I felt was interesting is the dynamic between Hannibal and especially the way that he treats someone that I think he does at least a little feel as a friend. At the same time, even though you could feel that friendship, at the same time, it feels like you're watching Hannibal have a live vivisection of poor Will, just dissecting him and watching how all of the parts move. And it is both tragic and addicting. It's like
it's
popcorn. You can't stop eating it no matter how much it gets stuck in your teeth.
there's a lot of small details in this series. I think that's probably one of the most appealing aspects with the plot is how they just pick small details out. Like, they show things for you just so they can bring them out later. In this show, everything comes down to the first episode, honestly. Everything comes out to Garrett Jacob Hobbs and how that has affected Will. Every small detail, like even Hannibal when he's messing with the fly fishing stuff
I would
in
have
one episode.
never thought that that had such a big plot point in the end.
And like whenever he goes up to him and smells him and says like you need to change your aftershave and all this, you wouldn't think, but that him smelling him was actually a big important aspect because he finds out that he is suffering from a disease or a condition.
An autoimmune disease.
All those little small tiny details, and I think they're really perfectly executed. And although Will's my favorite character, the way they write Hannibal is the best because they have so many tiny things like dominoes that are just put up as the series continues on, and then they just flick them. Especially at the end, it seems like everything just stacks up. Like he like shows Jack Crawford. He shows him all the shows him the interviews, tells him things, and they're half truths because they're real things that he's presenting to them, actively concealing information and making it out to be that Will is this madman. And we're not even going to bother with spoiler protection on this. We're just going to dig down deep. These were what we thought about Will Graham and Hannibal Lecter, but let's go ahead and go through the other cast of characters. Like Jack Crawford is played by Lawrence Fishburne, who's a pretty good actor in his own right. He comes off pretty well, and they go into some details about his wife. I know from hindsight that these moments are going to mean more later on. What were your thoughts on the characters? Not just Jack Crawford, Freddie Lowndes, Gideon, who is the guy that impersonated the Chesapeake Ripper or was convinced that he was the Chesapeake Ripper by the psychiatrist, who we can also talk about as well.
I'll start with Jack. His character had a feeling of truth to it, but at the same time, we got to see as his obsession took over, even to the point where he started to negate Will's better nature. He knew Will was falling apart, and he gave him sort of a
way out,
flippant way out. It was like it was almost like you're showing a child you could not get your shots, but then you're going to die. That was the way it felt. It was kind of like you don't want to have your shots? Well, you're going to get polio and you're going to die.
You can step away from this, but people are going to die at the expense of this fact.
So it was they talk about how they gave him a way out, and it's like, you didn't give him a way out. You gave him a guilt trip.
I thought Jack Crawford was good. I thought they portrayed him really well, and I think that they portray him later on as well. We'll get into that with the next couple of episodes that we do. I honestly think Gideon I really liked him.
I thought he was cool, but in such a strange way.
Crazy, but and the thing is, I know what comes after it. I'm like, it's only going to get better with Gideon. What they do, what his interactions with Hannibal, they're only going to get better. I liked Gideon, and the doctor has a affection for not Hannibal, but Will Graham. What's her name? Bloom.
Yeah, chick who wants to go for the bone zone.
Yeah, I like her as well. I think for the most part, the characters are pretty well done. Even Freddie Lounds, who is an annoying character, like a Perez Hilton kind of character.
She's so unlikable, but in one of those ways where you're like, I really really want to see her on the dinner table, but at the same time, she's just so expertly played.
Mhm. And so, what do you think about the overall story? How do you, I mean, as it, not just the characters, not just how they're pitted with Will Graham and Hannibal, but as an overall format of how the episodes went, do you have any criticisms of how they did some things, or do you just think it was perfect across the board?
I'd say it was pretty amazingly well done, and I admit that I've watched my share of cop shows, especially, and one thing that always got me is, I enjoyed the piece by piece, day by day things, but it ended up feeling stale after a while, no matter what. They find a dead body, they find the killer, blah, blah, blah. Then they somehow find two very, very loose, very random threads and tie them together for a finale. And a lot of times it either ends up going big or going home, where it's like, oh man, yeah! Or it goes, eh. Or they do a cliffhanger and you're just like, come on, man, now I gotta wait like 6 months. But the way that they did it with Hannibal, I didn't feel that staleness that I feel with other shows that have a similar format where you have to figure out the whodunit. It didn't have that staleness and it didn't have that repetitive feeling. I was excited to find out what happens next because each time was different. Not a slight difference, but the emotions, the way that everyone interacted was just like a beautiful symphony of insanity and cannibalism. That's how I would describe it.
I would say I agree. Normally, whenever I try to talk or do some discussions about things, I usually try to play the devil's advocate, at least on some level. Even if I don't necessarily criticize these elements, I try to point them out just to bring them to the table for discussion. But honestly, with this, even just the first season, I don't really have any real criticisms about it. As I was watching it with you and like I said, this is the third time watching it for me, I tried to think about some things that, like, okay, maybe they could have done better. In retrospect, I think that it was a story well told altogether. At first, whenever we were watching it, I thought to myself, like, maybe these elements could have been done better. Like, for instance, with some of the serial killers, for a little bit, for a couple episodes, it feels like a killer of the week kind of format. And it never feels like you wonder much about who did it or why they did it. It just kind of goes through the motions on those killers. This is the killer, this is what he did. He made a giant tiki thing, and now this is why he did it, and then you go on about the next episode. But then when I think about it, no, because at the same time, these elements are important because they show the chipping away of Will Graham. And they're presented as a killer of the week format, but they mean so much more more than that, because there's a reason that they introduce these copycat killer, which of course is Hannibal. But everything slowly comes together and it's building towards something. It's a slow burn in some respects. It has more to it than what you might think at first watch. Some other aspects I would want to point out are the music that was done in it, the music's very, very simple. It's not like a very, very complex thing, but there's a distinctive sound to it. It kind of reminds me of Dexter on some level, which you haven't seen. It reminds me of Dexter, especially in the first few seasons when it was first introducing its sound, a certain quality to it. And also, of course, as you pointed out, the scenery and the aesthetic, there is a certain beauty to it all. Like, not just the food that Hannibal creates, but also just the way it's presented is a very beautiful way, especially with the special effects. Like, they have a lot of things that are a lot just appeasing to the eye. They're beautiful in a very, very morbid kind of way. Like, whenever you see an angel sitting over the bed with its, like, I know it's a person with their back, the skin made into flaps to look like angel wings. And I'm like, that is beautiful in a very, very sadistic kind of way. And especially whenever it's Will Graham trying to piece together things. Like, they do this thing where he kind of works backwards. And watching it all sewn together, put together again, and seeing how it was made, it's just a really cool sight. And there's also a lot of symbolism in the show. I mentioned to you at one point how you notice in the first season he always sees this moose, which is a representation of Hannibal. As you can see, because in Hannibal Lecter's office, a moose statue, which he actually uses to kill Tobias at one point. Will always sees moose in a depiction of Hannibal without, it's like a subconscious thing. I don't know, I like those little small details.
I thought that the dream sequences themselves, while both demented, also were beautiful in their own way. And you could see the descent of poor William Defoe. Like,
William
poor,
Defoe.
poor Will's mind. You could see it falling apart, but at the same time, struggling to put all of the little puzzle pieces together. And when they all fall in line by that one tiny nudge from Hannibal, almost like you're tapping the tip of a tower to make everything fall in perfect. It didn't just make Hannibal's plans fall into perfect, it also shaped the picture that Will could not get to fully form. And watching that piece by piece, and at the same time, his identity crisis with his first victim, Jacob Hobbs, it's just so well represented.
Like, I think that they do a very good job of presenting. Like I said, the key points I would bring up with my conclusion about Hannibal is that it presents a great protagonist and a great antagonist, and it shows one of them at their absolute weakest, and it shows one of them at their absolute strongest, and so it shows one of them falling sucker to a lot of things and just trying to survive, trying to figure things out. He's got his own, and I think that they capture it very well with one of the lines that they said is Hannibal more or less just entered Will Graham's mind and moved the furniture around, and he didn't do it for and there is an argument for whether or not Hannibal sees Will as his friend or if he sees him as his plaything. And honestly, I don't think that you really can have an affirmative answer. There is some points whenever he's talking to the therapist, his own therapist, played by Gillian Anderson, otherwise known for the X-Files. But anyways, whenever he's talking with her, like it seems like they're friends, but at the same time, he's like lying about most of the things he's saying, and it seems like he's playing her too. Like he puts on a human suit and he just kind of does things for the fun of it. Like he does things because he wants to see what will happen. And I think that's a very interesting character, and it's a very unpredictable character. He just kind of does whatever he wants, and there's not always going to be a clear explanation for it. At least not originally seen. He just kind of does it because why not? And I think that's one of the best things about it. Altogether, I really, really enjoyed Hannibal. And so, what would you say, Beccah Grace?
I would say so far it has been a really well done series, and as much as I shouldn't, I'm finding myself in the same problem as I had in Death Note, going, "Go! That's my psychotic baby. You kill that bitch." So that's kind of the problem, but it's a good problem. So I'm enjoying it quite thoroughly, and I am very excited because I'm not sure if that one girl, the daughter, I'm not sure if she's actually dead because they only found her ear. And I'm also really curious on how Hannibal got dude's ear into his stomach. And I really can't wait. So I'm really excited for that.
Well, everybody, thank you for joining us on the Mix and Mash podcast. I'm McConaughey here alongside Beccah Grace, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you will leave a comment in the comment section below, letting us know what you thought about Hannibal. And I hope you will join us for our next episode where we talk about. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Have a good evening, eavesdroppers.